everyone in e-com says that you should be making 30% of your revenue from email. But have you ever thought that that number seems suspiciously round and almost like someone just made it up one day and everyone's been repeating the same thing ever since? No one really knows why 30% is the magic number that everyone should aim for, but everyone is saying that it should be. And I think that is nonsense, and I'm going to explain to you why. And the first reason why I think this makes no sense is that different businesses will have vastly different revenues compared to their list size. So I've worked with brands that, for example, were making 200,000 a month and had 250,000 people in their list because I'd been around for 30 years. But I've also worked with brands that were making the same amount but had only been around for about a year because they just had very fast growth in their first year. And so as you can imagine, those second types of brands will have a lot fewer people on their lists. And just looking at those two things, right? You have the same revenue, so you might have the same spend on top of funnel like Facebook and meta marketing, but you will not have the same revenue potential from your email. And trying to reach that will cause more harm than good. And we'll cover that in a second. But that's the first thing. Different businesses work with very different numbers. And so giving everyone the same target doesn't make sense from that perspective. The second thing is, why do we even consider attribution, right? Everyone knows that attribution with email specifically relies on view through or click through, meaning that if anyone opens or views your emails in a specific window, most of the time it's going to be 5 to 7 days, that sale will get attributed by Klaviyo as an email sale entirely, even if that sale just came in from a paid source. So a subscription brand can easily have over 40 or 45% in revenue share. And half of that could just come from subscription renewals. So that really just makes the revenue share itself not very interesting to look at. And what happens then is a lot of brands just kind of don't really know what to look at. So they're just kind of like, yeah, we have green arrows. Klaviyo's saying this is excellent. So then they're not really touching it. But you're kind of missing all the optimizations you could do in the emails that are actually generating sales because they're masked by all this volume of sales. So that's the second thing, right? Was we have over attribution, and a lot of times that just gets ignored because there's not an easy solution to this problem. The third thing is what a lot of brands do wrong is that a lot of brands oversend, right? So they'll have a month where it's not going as well, or they have an ambitious target, and in order to reach it, they get very aggressive. And so what happens in that process a lot of the time is that the valuable parts of the list churn faster than the lower value parts of the list. So you may have a list that is technically growing, but actually the parts of your list that are generating you the most revenue are shrinking. And that is something that's hard to tell because that is not something that is apparent in Klaviyo, for example. If you look at reports, there's nowhere where this shows up. So this could happen over a year and no one notices. And so then the revenue potential of the list shrinks. And obviously that's not a good thing. That's something we want to solve. But the worst thing you can do in that situation is get even more aggressive and keep the same target, right? Because now you're in a situation where your potential earnings are lower than last year. And this has nothing to do with your top of funnel revenue or revenue share. This is just simply the fact that now you have fewer people that are actually interested or likely to make a purchase soon. So why would you have the same target in a year where you had a lot of people likely to make a purchase soon, and in a year where you don't have that many? It makes no sense, right? You want to have a higher target in the year that is where you have a lot of sales potential, and then a lower target in the year where you don't have that much potential. Otherwise, you're kind of just dreaming. And what happens if you're dreaming in that sense is you get, like, this happens a lot. Brands get very aggressive because they want to meet these aggressive targets, not realizing that they can't do it because there's just not the potential in the list. And so what they do is further reduce the small amount of high intent people they have left, instead of nurturing them, bringing the list back to life, breathing new life into it. That takes work, and that takes a dedicated strategy that is very different than let's get as many sales out of this as we can. So this blindly just always aiming for 30% revenue share can really hurt your business, and I think it does hurt a lot of businesses without them really realizing it. So at this point, you might think, well, what do we do about this? Because, we have a problem. We know that our ESPs are not necessarily very good at tracking this problem or showing it to us, even though the information is there. How can we navigate this situation? How can we make sure, like, what should our target be, right? If it's not 30% revenue share, what should it be? So I am very much against generic benchmarks as a whole. I think, having looked at a lot of e-commerce businesses, we have so many different situations. I think the only solution is to establish benchmarks based on your business. So, and that is based on your past performance and based on your future potential. So when it comes to past performance, there are a couple things you can do that really helps reduce the noise and make predictions or make targets that are actually achievable, and not just achievable now and next month or this quarter, but achievable over the long term, and that actually make your business stronger instead of weakening your list. So the first thing is try to get rid of noise. So for subscription brands, for example, you'll want to create a dashboard outside of Klaviyo or whatever ESP you're using that excludes subscription renewal flows. So the good thing about the noise is it's usually concentrated in 2 flows or 1 flow if you're not a subscription brand. So it's very easy. You just create a dashboard and then you deduce the revenue from that 1 or 2 flow, these 2 flows from that dashboard. So you will just look at the revenue completely excluding these 2 flows. That's a more conservative approach, and it will lead to a lower benchmark to target, but also it will lead to a benchmark that is more driven by email performance. So one thing, for example, about the welcome flow for people who just signed up is you can try this for your business. If you look at the ad spend, like the curve of your ad spend and the curve of your welcome flow revenue, it usually tracks very closely. So if you increase ad spend, your welcome flow revenue goes up. If you decrease ad spend, it goes down. And it's very, very close. So that kind of gives us a signal that the emails themselves aren't necessarily doing that much selling, or at least the first email isn't. It's a common effort. So if you're not sure, and if the welcome flow is just a big chunk of your reported revenue, remove that noise from your reporting. Just have a report that just shows flow revenue without that, because other flows are a lot less sensitive to those changes. So that is the first thing, right? Remove the noise. If you're a subscription brand, when you remove the renewal flows from your reports, and you will go from a 45% attributed revenue share to a 23. So that's the first thing, right? Remove the noise. The second thing is add some context to your reports. So typically there will be 2 major directional phases that a brand could be in. It could be either growing or shrinking. And I don't mean growing revenue or shrinking revenue. I mean growing the potential revenue inside your list. And that might sound very abstract and weird, but I promise you this is a real thing. If you have a lot of people in your list that are engaging at a very high rate, they're clicking a lot, they're opening a lot, or they're placing regular orders, right? All these people together, your highest value group, if that's shrinking, then even if your list is growing, you're in a shrinking phase. And that means you're probably oversending or not segmenting enough, or, not being strict enough with your segmentation. And it might also mean that your target is too high. So you're trying to reach a target that your list can't give you. And in doing that, you're further reducing your future earnings by churning people that don't need to be churned, and by causing people to churn that wouldn't otherwise churn, and by oversending you also increase your likelihood to land in promotions, which then reduces your visibility. So that creates a spiral. So if you see that the high value segments are shrinking, your targets should be different. Your targets should be focused on quality metrics like revenue per recipient, conversion rate, and that also should lead to a more conservative revenue share target, right? So you'll focus nurturing the list and growing it again and bringing it back to a situation where it can earn you, where the earnings potential goes up again and the high value group starts growing again. If you're in a growth phase, that's easier. It means that these high value segments are growing, and if they are growing, then you can be more aggressive with your sends, and you can send to bigger groups, or you can send more emails to the high intent people. So depending on which situation you're in, your revenue share target should go up or down. If you know that your list can handle more and is almost kind of asking for more, then you should obviously have a target that's higher. And if not, then it should be lower. And now you might be asking, okay, but this is all still conceptual. I don't have an actual figure. And the reason for that is that I don't really believe in generic benchmarks. I don't think that I should give you any number because most of the time that number will be wrong. So the best way that you can establish this number is look at your past performance and say, this has been our average over the last year, or if you have a very big difference in seasonality, this has been our difference, our average in the summer versus the Black Friday period versus the rest of the year, for example. And then establish benchmarks from there and kind of compare year over year how you're doing, and also tailor the expectation to the strategy you're having at the moment. So the reason I made this whole video is because it really upsets me when I see this kind of 30% being thrown around all the time. 30% is to me a lazy benchmark, and it's also a benchmark that no one actually believes in. Whenever I talk to an e-commerce owner or decision maker, they never really think that the 30% is actually generated by email. So why would we even talk about this, right? Let's instead take a little bit of time every month to clean the data, make sure you have a foundation you can actually work with, and then establish a benchmark from there. And don't feel like you're losing something if your reported revenue share is lower than 30%. Even if it's consistently lower than 30%, most of the brands that are showing a 30% revenue share include a lot of noise. So just chasing that blindly leads to more churn for your highest value customers especially, and more landing and promotion for everyone else. These two things lead to less visibility, and that leads to fewer email sales. And that is real, not just noise. This chasing a fantasy metric leads to losing real sales in the future. So don't do that. Clean your data, start with a good, healthy benchmark. It doesn't actually take that long if you just focus on the couple flows that really drive 90% of your noise, and then build a strategy that really fits your business. And don't be scared to adjust the metrics depending on the situation that you're seeing. And that is how you scale email revenue for the long term.